If you have to lose Jim Schwartz to hire the right coach, so be it. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. The Browns cannot let Jim Schwartz hold this coaching search hostage. The longer this drags on, honestly, the more worried I get that Nate Shieldhouse could just opt for going back to LA. And at this point, can the team even sell Schwartz to the fan base? All that and more coming up. I do want to thank you for being on every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network, and that is all thanks to you. Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. I've said it before. I will say it here again. Living in fear of losing Jim Schwartz, and that being potentially the thing that prevents the Browns from making a decision or hiring a coach who they maybe believe is the best answer, the best option moving forward into the future, is not good. It is not good. That is not a good outcome if you settle for Jim Schwartz simply because you're afraid of losing him and what that means for the defense and what that means for certain players in the locker room. I understand that stuff matters and that players' opinions matter. But you also can't live in fear of what's going to happen to our franchise if we lose Jim Schwartz. Because if that's how you feel, then you probably should just make him the head coach. But it sounds like that is kind of what it's coming down to. It's Jim Schwartz versus Nate Shieldhouse. We've seen reporting that Shieldhouse is at least willing to keep Schwartz potentially on staff. But here's the thing. That's a two-way street. That relationship between coach and defensive coordinator, coach and coordinator at any spot is a two-way street. And Schwartz, frankly, has to be willing to work for a coach with minimal experience in this league, who is 25 years at least his junior, and respect that person as his boss. Like, Schwartz has been coaching in the NFL as long as Nate Shieldhouse has been alive. And I can understand why that may, rub him the wrong way if he were to get passed over and then you're told, hey, not only did we not choose you for this job, now you get to come sit and work for this guy who has never been a head coach before, who only has 2 years of tangible NFL experience in the coaching ranks, that we just happen to think is going to be a better answer long term and has this innovative offense that we're enamored by and all these different things. Like, at this point, I feel like Shieldhouse is the better option because I've talked about this before, but like the state of things, where this team is right now, where the offense is right now, where you have an offense that needs a vision, it needs direction, it needs somebody who can come in with a fresh perspective and build this thing from the ground up. Jim Schwartz isn't going to fix the offense. And the idea, like, I've heard people throw on this idea of like, there's bridge quarterbacks. What about a bridge coach? That seems like a complete waste of time for everybody. If you hire a coach knowing, well, we're going to give him this year and then see how it goes. What's the point? What was the point of firing Kevin Stefanski if that's all you're going to do? And so it's the cost of doing business that sometimes you're not going to get everything that you want. Sometimes you're going to anger some people or upset some people on the way, but you have to make the decision that is best. And if you're Andrew Berry, if this decision will ultimately determine your future as Andrew Berry, as your future with the organization, which it very well could, because how many times have we seen GMs get fired because they choose the wrong coach, or GMs get fired because they choose a coach that then doesn't want to work with them the next year? Like, the GMs get fired all the time after picking head coaches. And so Andrew Berry has to make the decision that he thinks is wholeheartedly going to be the best for the organization, be the best for him. That's going to put this organization in position to be successful and start winning football games and change the trajectory of things here in Cleveland. That's what he's looking for. He has to do that. Do you want to go out? If this could cost you your job, if this decision could ultimately cost him his job, would you rather go out making a safe pick and just going with Jim Schwartz because, well, maybe the owner wants him and doesn't want to lose him, and because he knows the organization inside and out and he's been here, and you feel like, you know, you don't want to ruffle any feathers, and he's a good backup option if you need a fallback plan. Is that how you want to go out? Or do you want to go out taking the big swing and knowing, hey, if it fails, so be it? Andrew Berry strikes me as the kind of guy who would do the latter. He signed on for the Deshaun Watson thing. That experience is going to be a black eye in his resume for years to come. And unless he identifies the right quarterback here in Cleveland finally and gets that sort of going in the right direction, that's what he's going to have to live with forever. And so he already took one big swing and missed. I've talked about it before, but like, it's probably going to take another big swing to get out of this mess that the Browns find themselves in. And that's going to start with this head coach decision, whoever Andrew Berry chooses. And it doesn't make sense for Andrew Berry to be in charge of the search, allegedly, and then be undermined by other people in the organization to just choose Jim Schwartz. If that's what's happening here, then that's not a good look. So listen, I understand how people feel about Jim Schwartz. I do want to talk later about the idea that, like, can they even sell Jim Schwartz to the fan base at this point? Because there has been a really abrupt turn this week towards questioning why the team would hire Jim Schwartz. And that was not the case 3 weeks ago when this all started, where you had, you had the decision made to fire Kevin Stefanski, and there was a lot of people banging the drum that Jim Schwartz should be the guy, including in that building. And so I now understand there's at least some appreciation for him, and that the fan base, I'm sure most in the fan base, maybe you included, don't actually want to lose Jim Schwartz. They'd like to see him stay. But I also think it's important to understand if they think Nate Shieldhouse is the next great thing, the next Sean McVay, whatever, and they want him to be their coach, if it means you lose Jim Schwartz, I'm sorry. You just got to kind of roll with that and live with that, because you need to make the best decision here for the franchise, for the organization. And it's going to have to be sort of accepted that you might, some of the crossfire, some of the backlash, the end outcome could be that Jim Schwartz ends up being on the outs here. And you just got to kind of accept that. I understand it would be a tough blow, but I have faith that they would be able to figure that out and soften the blow to a degree. But yeah, you cannot let this search be held up or be held hostage because you're worried about Jim Schwartz and losing him and whether or not that's going to derail your organization further. If Nate Shieldhouse is the guy, if he's the guy they think is the best coach, you hire him. You don't think twice about it, and you live with the circumstances that come thereafter. And if that includes losing Jim Schwartz, that it is what it is. That's the approach they have to absolutely take to the search and to the situation. Now, all that said, the longer this thing goes on, we're on day 24 now since Kevin Stefanski was fired, and there's murmurs that we could get a decision at any moment. We'll see. But the longer this thing goes on, the more concerned I get that Nate Shieldhouse could ultimately just say, you know what, I'm going back to LA and I'm going to wait for next cycle to see and take my chances with whatever jobs are going to be available in 2027. I'll talk about that coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
There's nothing quite like being at an NBA game inside the arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part's always been not so simple. That's why Gametime has become the go-to app, my go-to app, frankly, for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with you, the fan. Being able to see the view from your seat before you buy makes the decision easy and clear, and you know exactly what things are going to look like out in the field in front of you or out on the court in front of you when you get where, depending on where you're going to sit. I love the fact that there's the all-in pricing up front, so when you get to the end, there's no surprise fees added on that always drove me nuts. Gametime has taken that out. They have clarity on what your tickets are going to cost, all inclusive, right there in the app on the main page. There's great last-minute options too, with NBA tickets showing up at solid prices. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today, and remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. All right, so here's the thing. As we continue talking about this coaching search, it drags on to day 24, and we wonder where the Browns are going to land in terms of who they choose. And at this point, by the way, based on what I've sort of heard and my inklings on things, it does feel like Andrew Berry is really pushing or forcing the issue that he wants to hire Nate Shieldhouse to be the next coach of the Cleveland Browns. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to end that way, because again, there's always other parties that get involved. There's always other opinions that are a part of this conversation from ownership on down. And so there's a lot of sort of ideas being tossed around right now that have to be considered, and it might still end with the team doing the thing I said not to do in the first segment and be so concerned with losing Jim Schwartz that you just make him the guy. We'll see. But another thing that could play out too, and this is probably the thing I'm the most worried about, is that you could just end up seeing here Nate Shieldhouse decide, if you wait too long, and if this thing keeps rolling into however many days it's going to roll into, you could just see Nate Shieldhouse decide, you know what, I'm doing pretty good over here in LA. I'm on Sean McVay's staff. I get closer and closer to being a primary play caller every day, or being the offensive coordinator every day. I got a nice gig carved out. My family's here. We love it in LA. Whatever. I'm just going to stay and take my chances in 2027 with whatever jobs come available. It's a very likely thing that could happen. I don't think it's far-fetched to say that the longer this goes on, the more maybe miffed somebody like Shieldhouse becomes, and he doesn't want to have his future just up in the air for days and days and days. He wants an answer. So you have to get this thing sort of finalized sooner rather than later. I do think, to a degree, that's a little bit of what happened with Grant Udinski. I think it's kind of twofold, that the situation with how they want to retain Schwartz in some capacity, and I do think both coaches seemed at least open to the idea of keeping Schwartz, but may have also had other plans of who they wanted to bring on as a defensive coordinator, and that the process was going to, I think it was probably obvious that the process was going to take a little bit longer to play out, and there wasn't going to be a clear-cut answer, in the immediate future, especially after Grant Udinski met with the team, going into the weekend, and he probably decided, you know what, I'll take my chances next year. Good luck to you guys. Sorry, but no thanks. And we'll keep it moving here. And I'm worried about the same sort of thing happening with Nate Shieldhouse, where he's like, he doesn't want to wait around to find out if Jim Schwartz is going to accept this potential structure that would be him as the head coach and Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator, or he doesn't want to have to sit and wait to find out what his future holds. He just wants an answer now. So, and I can respect that. I can understand that. And that would be a disaster scenario, because it then leaves the Browns doing the thing that I've continued to say in recent days, especially, you can't do, which is essentially settle for Jim Schwartz because, well, he's the best option we got based on who's bowed out, who's still in the mix, and who wants actually to take this job. So it's another thing that's kind of on my mind. It's another thing that I worry about, is losing out on another candidate because this search is taking such a long time. And that's the other thing, is you are talking about timelines here. Senior Bowl is this week. They probably want to have some people down there on a coaching staff that can scout, get a sense of guys that they might like. I understand a lot of that is Andrew Berry's doing in terms of the scouting department and those guys and people being present, boots on the ground, to do further homework on guys that they've been already keeping an eye on throughout the pre-draft or throughout the college season and all those different things. And so there's certainly, I can promise you the Browns have a presence there in Mobile, Alabama. But, I also think they'd like to have some coaches get down there as well and start sort of getting an eye on things and seeing what they think and being able to have some perspectives and opinions on things once we get closer to the draft and they're going to be selecting these players. I think that's all very normal procedure, and you want to get somebody in there quick. I understand, like, it doesn't always happen that way. It sure sounds like a team like the Raiders might be waiting until after the Super Bowl because they're maybe going to hire somebody from one of the Super Bowl teams before they'd make a decision. So their decision might come down later, and they might not have a full-fledged coaching staff present for certain things here coming on down the pike when it comes to, the Senior Bowl and whatnot, because they're going to have to wait a little bit longer. But at the same time, like, it's in an ideal world, you can get some people on a coaching staff together to start doing some of this work that needs to be done leading up to the draft and start getting guys looking at things. So it's gone on long enough, I think is the point I'm trying to make here. Kevin Stefanski was fired the Monday after the season ended 24 days ago. You've had a lot of time to go through the process of your search, which, listen, I've said this before, just because it's been a longer search doesn't mean that the process hasn't been good or anything like that. Like, I don't think it's a matter of the Browns' process isn't working or, they have too much on their plate or they have too many candidates or anything like that. I mean, guys have dropped out, right? So it's like I think they had a healthy number of guys that they were considering. I don't think it was anything like that. I think it's just at this point, though, gone on long enough where it's like, all right, time to make a decision. Another job got filled on Tuesday. Bills promoting Joe Brady from offensive coordinator to head coach. I was kind of surprised by that. And I also thought it was interesting, like, a lot of the hires this cycle have been about, like, familiarity, right? It's been John Harbaugh going to the Giants, guy who's done it in this league. It's Mike McCarthy going to the Steelers, frankly, guy who's proven some things in this league. It's Kevin Stefanski going to the Falcons. The only, like, new names are Jesse Minter going to the Baltimore, and obviously you have Jeff Hafley going to the Dolphins, who's never been a head coach. So those are kind of the two fresh ones right now, and there might be some others at some point. But there's a lot of, like, familiarity with these hires. It's not like the young up-and-coming guys just yet. And the Browns might be the team that pulls the trigger on that if they decide to choose Shieldhouse. But again, you don't want to miss that boat. You don't want to miss that opportunity, because the longer you take, now that you're at this stage of the search where you've gone through second interviews and it's just about simply making a decision, and if you seem like you're waffling, that might turn a guy off. That might make him feel like, yeah, I don't want this job if you don't want me, so I'm out of here. I'm done. You're at the stage now where you got to get this thing across the finish line and make sure your candidate knows, like, we want you. We're not trying, we're not struggling with this decision, and we know we want you to be our guy. And so the longer this thing goes on, the longer this thing drags out. At this point, yes, I worry about somebody like Shieldhouse just deciding, I'm going back to LA. I got it pretty good here. There'll be other opportunities in the future to coach again and be a head coach. So we'll see what this all looks like. We'll see how it all plays out. Again, any minute, like while you're listening to this podcast, depending on what time of day you're listening to it, we could get an announcement that the Browns have made their decision. So we'll certainly have you covered with an episode when that does go down. But, we get the sense it's going to be happening soon, but we don't have an answer yet. And because of that, you don't want to lose out on a candidate, potentially the best quality candidate, if that's how they view Nate Shieldhouse, by, dragging your feet or taking too long here. And I think that's something the Browns just have to keep in mind at this point. With all that said, we've talked a ton about Jim Schwartz and Nate Shieldhouse, which is what it feels like it's coming down to. Tom Monk and Anthony Lynn still in the picture here. We'll talk about that a little bit in this next conversation. But the main thing I want to get to, with how reactions have been around the idea that Jim Schwartz could still get the job, can the Browns even sell a Jim Schwartz hire to the fan base at this point? We'll talk about that coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with the special offer just in time for the biggest game ever. Whether you're backing the favorite riding with the underdog, or building one last same game parlay, this is the game everyone's waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. Patriots going to Santa Clara to play the Seahawks on the West Coast for this game, as we know. And they're 4.5 point underdogs going into this matchup. Maybe you want to ride with the Patriots and you think that defense can get the job done and get Sam Darnold seeing some ghosts. Maybe you think the Seahawks are just going to be too much of a juggernaut. You want to do a same game parlay, build out some stats for some of these great players, these elite players on this offensive side of the ball for Seattle. Whatever your mindset is, if you're a new customer, you can bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after Super Bowl is over, the season's over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, so we've talked about Nate Shieldhouse and not wanting to waste the opportunity, missing out on him if you drag your feet. We've obviously talked about Jim Schwartz and how he can't become the deterrent that keeps this thing from getting across the finish line because you're worried about losing him. I also think, though, in the Jim Schwartz conversation, I just wonder how hard of a sell it would be at this point for the organization if they choose Schwartz. And this might just be hyperbole that I'm picking up on. I don't like to use social media purely as like a gauge of how the majority of the fan base feels. And I do still think there's a clear respect for Jim Schwartz. And there's a lot of people who probably still think he should be the head coach for this football team. But what I will say is, it does seem like there is a collective feeling that choosing Jim Schwartz would be the wrong decision, and from the fan base. And if that's the case, man, I don't know how the team's going to sell it to the fan base at this point that, like, hey, you know what? Jim Schwartz is our guy after this 3+ week search, and everything we went through. We had all these offensive guys that we were looking at, but we decided that keeping things mostly status quo was the answer. The reactions that people have had to that being the way this plays out, and maybe even that including Todd Monken on staff, maybe Anthony Lynn on staff, people seem like they would be disappointed at this point with Jim Schwartz being the hire. And again, I've made this clear a number of times, but it's nothing against Jim Schwartz for me as to why I don't think he should be the guy. And I think it's fair that they gave him a legitimate shot at getting this job. I just think it's not far enough removed from the coach that you just fired because things aren't going right. It's also like, for an organization that says we're innovative, we are forward thinking, all this, finding the guy that's the next Sean McVay is the most innovative thing that you can do. We're hoping you find the next guy that is of that ilk is the most innovative, forward thinking thing you can do. So I appreciate the fact that that's what they're trying to go for here. I admit, and I've said it dozens of times, that there's an unknown with Nate Shieldhouse of, like, can he manage a locker room? How will he do with those situations? How will he do when what hits the fan? We don't know. And that's a risk I'm willing to take. That's a risk that if Andrew Berry is banging the table as much as it sounds like he is for Nate Shieldhouse, that he's willing to take, because he seems to believe this is the right guy for the team, and that's good. I can appreciate that. But I don't know if it's because it's the shiny new toy and it's an unknown and there's some mystery there, versus like Schwartz has history as a head coach, and people have brought up the fact that, like, he had one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history. He had one of the best receivers in NFL history, and he still couldn't do more with it than one playoff appearance. I think those are fair criticisms. I also think Jim Schwartz, does deserve a second chance at some point, or should have deserved a second chance by now. And it's crazy he hasn't gotten one. I just don't know if it's the timing of it here in Cleveland is right. I'd love if he was able to stay on staff as the defensive coordinator, but no one's going to force him to do that either. And so I do wonder if, like, this whole 3-week odyssey of a search and everything that's gone into it, the twists and turns, the drama of it all, candidates dropping out. Now it seems like you're waffling on what you want to do and trying to get this thing to the finish line. If it ends with just Jim Schwartz, I do think the fan base is going to be largely disappointed. And I think it will be a tougher sell than it probably was 3 weeks ago to the fan base to convince them be on board with this. This is exciting. This is the guy. I also wonder if like the philosophical part of it matters too. Like Jim Schwartz being a defensive guy, you're not worried about the defense because of some of the players on it. And I do feel like you bring in somebody else, like they're going to have success because of some of the players on it as well. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but or wouldn't take a step back, but you already do have a good foundation there, right? I think the idea of like an offensive guy fixing the offense, which is the biggest issue for this team right now, is also something that makes people excited. The idea of that. If I'm missing the boat here, if I'm totally wrong, call me out on it. Like, mention it in the YouTube comments. Hit me up on Twitter at @Spencito_. I can accept that. It just feels like, though, there's been this shift from maybe early on in this process, Jim was the guy everybody wanted. Or just hire Jim Schwartz. I saw that a lot when Kevin Stefanski first got fired. To now, I think people got so caught up in the aura of a Nate Shieldhouse or a Grant Udinski and what that would mean and trying to do something different that, you know, it almost made the Jim Schwartz thing feel less appealing. And again, I just maintain what was the point of all this, just to land on the guy who was already there. You could have promoted. You could have fired Kevin late in the season and given him a chance to sort of audition for the job. You could have made this decision a lot quicker if you really just wanted Jim Schwartz that bad. So I think there's a lot of levels to this, but I do think my general feeling is that it would be disappointing to the fan base, and I wonder how tough of a sell that would be to fans going into next year and beyond, that like this is our long-term answer. And I also just think the optics of how these last couple of days have gone would be bad. Some of the things that are out there in terms of like how this is playing out, the fact that it does kind of feel like Schwartz is, for lack of a better phrase, which I used earlier, holding the team hostage, where he might not be agreeable to staying on staff if he's not the head coach and he gets passed over, which again, I understand that. But like if that's what this is kind of coming down to, it would just seem, I think, it would take the wind out of the sails a little bit if it's just, well, hey, we gave in to the idea that we just didn't want to lose Jim Schwartz and that we went with the safe route. Because I've said that a bunch of times too. The idea that it does just feel safe if you pick Schwartz. I think people are excited about something that's maybe new and different and offensive minded, like a Nate Shieldhouse. And I think that it feels like that's where the attention has shifted for the fan base, that's maybe more so the guy that they're looking at or they want in their next head coach. So I do think it would ultimately be a tough sell. But if I'm wrong, if you really want Jim Schwartz, if you think he's the right guy, if you think he's been from day one the guy you wanted and the Browns should still hire him, say it. Let me know, because I'm sure there's still a number of fans out there that feel that way. I've seen some. I just think there's been truly like this paradigm shift from Jim's the guy to now, you know what, I don't know if that's the right move. And I think it would be like the most Browns hire ever if they just kind of stuck with this guy after 3 weeks and went through all this just to land back on Jim Schwartz. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcast and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. If you never miss an episode as well, join the Everydayer Club. It's built for you. Get Locked On Browns ad-free plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com or check out the link in the show notes to learn more. And I tell you every time, but the next time you hear from me, we might be talking about a change at head coach and the Browns finally making their decision. Until then, keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs and Locked On Guardians. Talk to you soon, Cleveland.